Okay, I've been practicing this take a couple times, and I'm doing it again. It's regarding misandry, which is the mistreatment of men. I know that in the dictionary, technically, it is the hatred of men, but in our modern times, misandry means the mistreatment of men, the injustices towards men. Okay, the unfair disadvantages that men have, and misandry and misogyny. I mean, which is obviously the mistreatment of women, the unfair disadvantages towards women. Okay. Now, I'm doing this video because I have a, I have a, I have an objection towards feminist theory, and it's not my objection is not in terms of its validity. Um, well, at least the validity in its own claim. There are disadvantages that men have in our society, obviously, and yes, in the Western world. There's men have many advantages in terms of being perceived in certain situations. Um, many of the much of the perceptions are much of the perceptions I would say are invalid. Okay, so men do have privileges in many regards in our society, and yes, in the Western world. Many of the claims that feminists make about this, I agree. However, when there have been claims made that show a clear advantage toward women, many of the feminist apologists attempt to desensitize, or they tend to make it. They tend to, yes, desensitize the severity of these advantages by declaring that these disadvantages only show a patriarchal society, and they show how we need to progress, or how we need to support women's rights. And implicitly they show that we need to make women's rights the focal point of gender inequality, as opposed to uh, many of these issues that are in the men's rights movement. And I don't agree with a lot of the men's rights movement on many regards. I know that they do try to they do try to attempt to proclaim themselves as masculinists. Okay. Um, However, just getting back to the point, these disadvantages that men, these injustices that men go through in the society, I think that feminists are doing an injustice by I would say purposely exploiting them to further their own political ideology. But I would say that they, in many regards, desensitize the severity of these disadvantages. Okay. Now, I've I've thought heavily on I've thought heavily on whether to conclude that in our modern society we have a patriarchy and a matriarchy existing. That it's a man's world and a woman's world in the Western societies at least. Um, I I I'm not sure. I don't really think that matters whether men have more advantages or women have more advantages in our society, because there's so many advantages that cut both ways that I don't think that should be the emphasis when we're talking about gender inequality. I think we simply have to respect and value the severity of the disadvantages that men have. Okay. Now, in saying this, I want to show you just some of the examples of where disadvantages towards men and disadvantages towards women are used to prove misogyny. Okay? So I'm talking about direct, blatant disadvantages. Now, clearly, I mean, there's many people are very aware of the gender disadvantages women have. Okay, many of the double standards women have. So I won't go through those disadvantages. Okay, I'm going to go through the male disadvantages. Let's take, for example, domestic violence or social interaction where violence may be necessary to resolve a situation. There's a theme that there's a moral axiom which is pretty dominant. It's a traditional moral axiom, but people believe that this is the axiom of chivalry, which many feminists have shown is benevolently misogynistic. But this moral axiom is that you cannot, under any circumstances, hit a woman. Under any circumstances. It doesn't matter whether it is self-defense. Even if you make the claim that you're defending yourself against a woman attacking you, you are still wrong. You are still immoral to hit a woman. And why is this? Well, people go into many theories. Women are substantially weaker than men physically, so we don't want to injure them. But I can show examples where men and women are the same strength, and still that chivalry is still imposed on the man to not defend himself because she is a woman. So I don't think that matters. But the bottom line is whether this may be part of the reason, but the bottom line is that there's an undercurrent reason why this is so, that they just basically people think that is how a gentleman should act. Now, this has been shown to be misogynistic, where the feminists will say that this shows that men do not think that we can defend ourselves, or society in large do not think that women can defend themselves, because they will not give us the responsibility to incur violence when we are their aggressors. So this shows, from a feminist point of view, that we're not respected as people who can defend ourselves. Okay. This shows that, and they will even go on in terms of a more generalized theme, where this shows that society thinks that we should depend on men to protect us. Now, where this is applied was, where this type of theme was applied, and I actually read it, some bus driver in Ohio was defending himself against a woman who was attacking him, and he punched her. And many of the people who support a feminist theory were saying that, hey, this is great because this shows that women are equals. Or perhaps they didn't say it in that regard. I think more they were saying this has to happen. Like, oh, yeah, of course. She if we want to be seen as equal, then we have to suffer the consequences when we attack men. The problem with that is that it does not. There's clearly misandry shown. There's clearly misandry shown because it's not taken into account that if this man failed to defend himself, this would be a misandristic action, because it says that men's well-being is less important than women's. It clearly shows that. So to only talk about how women can be equal to men in terms of protection, and not to talk about how this misogynistic thing also has misandry, when it also induces the conclusion that women not protecting themselves, or women being dependent on men protecting themselves, also means that men have to sacrifice their well-being for women, and that men's well-being is valued less than women's well-being. Okay. So, you know, you can see this type of just blatant ignoring the misandry theme in many social interactions between men and women. Let's take, for example, one that is very, very, very popular, or that has been politically popular since the 1970s. Women having the right to fight. Women having the right to be in the military. Okay. Women wanting to have the right to be in the Marines. And now, keep in mind, the Marines, at least some of the Marines in the American military, they have to be the first responders in an attack, in an attack, or in a defense. So they're the first ones. They're the first ones on the line. Okay. The feminists have said that I want to be. Many feminists have complained that where are the Marines? Where are the first responding female Marines? Okay. They say that we want to be able to sacrifice our life for our country, because we are just as much part of this country as men are. Okay. Now, there's something very obvious that is missing in this whole discussion, or what I just discussed. Men have been sacrificing their lives. Men's lives are more disposable than women in this context. I'm talking about in the military context. Historically, men's lives have been more disposable than women's lives. That's a misandry theme. And that includes, all the way back. You don't kill women and children. You always say women and children. In combat, when it comes to combat, okay, even when it comes to civilians, and when you look at, if you look at the news, you do not kill women and children. Now, to be fair, you don't kill men civilians, but there's this implicit theme that men are if you're going to kill anybody, you kill a man. Okay. So, again, men's lives not being seen as, their lives being as worth as much as women's to keep alive. Okay. Now, if there was a context where the genders were flipped and men and women's lives were not seen as valuable, I would predict that the feminist theorists would say that this is misogyny, and that's the problem, because they could only see the disadvantage only when their gender is being disadvantaged. And when I say disadvantage, I mean the global disadvantage, because a theoretical feminist, a feminist will grant you that men have some disadvantages and women have some advantages, but they will only argue. But they will nevertheless argue that those apparent male disadvantages prove a global male patriarchal theme. That it's almost like it's that men's disadvantages are. How should I make the analogy? They're relative. They're they're temporal, they're finite, they're, yes, in one context they're disadvantaged, but they're not. But this disadvantage, ironically, points to a misogynistic thing. Like I said before, example, a man hitting a woman. I mean, women being protected, women having the explicit privilege to just hit a man. You know, a woman just slapping a guy right in the face, and a man not doing anything about it. That's not to a masculinist. That's seen as misandry. That, you know, a woman can simply do whatever he wants to a man because she's weaker, or not just because she's weaker, but because it's a convention that you don't do this to a woman. That a gentleman rises above it and does not hit a woman. Yes, physical injury has a lot to do with it, but there's something more to it. It's the same thing with the sexual double standards, but I'll get into that later. So, again, the masculinists will say, hey, well, this is misandry. And the feminists will look at this as a misogyny. Yes, men are getting hit, right? Men are being mistreated, yes, but that is what they would say, that is a situational. What they say, you can't just look at it as a isolated situation. You have to look at the whole theme of women being allowed to hit men. Okay, women allowed to hit men. What in their mind, it shows that men do not think women are tough, or they don't think that they can protect themselves, and they're treating them like children. Okay, perhaps maybe a feminist would say you don't necessarily have to hit them back, but this notion of allowing a woman to hit you, you're treating her like a child, and you're not holding her accountable for her actions. That you're saying that she's over emotional. You say she's over emotional, she can't help it, and you are the control. You are the calm one, and you have control. I think that maybe Rebecca Watson. She has not said this, obviously, but I'm just trying to tie it to something analogous to what Rebecca Watson said about how intuition, seen as an advantage or a compliment to women, is really a disadvantage, because it says that women rely more on their emotion, not on logic, and that's a implicit patriarchal theme, which he is right. Still doesn't take away. Still doesn't. I don't see how that argument really points into a exclusively a patriarchal theme, but she is right. But getting back to this women hitting men. This is accepted. The reason people are accepting this nonsense because they're saying that women don't have any control over their emotions. It's hormonal, and perceiving women this way is misogynistic, because you're perceiving men as having control over their hormones, control over their emotions, and this is part of the reason why women are not seen as great leaders or what have you. So the theoretical feminist looks at it more from a global standpoint. And yes, they're right. They're right that a misogynistic theme is running through it. What they're not right about is that misogynistic theme is predominant. Okay. That's the problem. When for example, let's take for example the death penalty. I mean, there were feminists, I think, in the 16th century, maybe not the 16th century, but I don't know when they wrote the scholarly review about the death penalty and how it is favorable towards women. I don't know the time period, but their main point was this: that a woman not being allowed to die was indicative of a misogynistic theme, because they were saying that since women they were trying to tie to it implicitly that since women don't vote in our country and don't make the laws, therefore they should not be held to the same standard of the laws as men. That was the blatant misogynistic theme running in it. However, however, that theory has been debunked because we now know that many women write the laws in our country. Many women run states, and still women, even in those states where women run it, are far less likely to die from the death penalty for the same crime than men. So that theory has been debunked. But that just shows you the example. That's just another example of how, not just like radical feminists, but just mainstream feminists, just regular mainstream feminists, how their exclusive worldview makes them ignore or desensitize to clear, blatant misandry, direct misandry directed towards men. So I'll leave you guys with that, and if you have any comments, just leave them, and I'll try to answer them. Thanks.